Okay, so
And we'll start the meeting of the Cold Spring Zoning Board of Appeals. I'm Eric Worth, the chair. We have 4 members here, which is a quorum. And we're going to start with a workshop for 41 Morris Avenue. And are you the architect?
I am. I'm Jeffrey Small, the architect for Vladlust.
You too. We'll have a workshop about this application, and that involves, first, I'll ask you just to give us a brief kind of summary of what, about not your full presentation, not a justification or a defense of the variance, but just to orient us. You can, we'll go over the application and ensure that it's in proper shape. And
Okay.
So go ahead.
Great. So this is an existing 2-story single-family dwelling in the corner of Morris Avenue in West Belvedere Street. We're proposing to build 2 open porches on either side of the existing house. Because it's a corner lot, we have 2 front yards. And this porch here on the right encroaches on this front yard, the one on West Belvedere, by a little less than 5 feet. So our application is to vary that.
Okay.
They're both single-story porches.
Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. The code, this is the RM district. The code calls for a 25-foot setback in front yards.
Quick question, just for my own. So it sounds like you guys have updated your zoning code recently.
Last year, I guess.
Oh, I see. And is it available on your website? The stuff that I downloaded.
It is, yeah.
So I have it being in the R1.
That's the old.
So that's the old one. So somehow I didn't get the new. Okay. So RN, you said?
R1.
RN.
Oh, you got it.
Today it's RN, yeah.
Today it's
And you can find the code at the village website. There's a menu for boards. That drops down, you see ZBA, and then there's a link on that page for the chapter 134, which is the chapter of the village code about zoning.
Okay. And the zoning map will be.
There's also a link for the zoning map there.
Okay.
And there's a third link for the work for a table of dimensional requirements. So it's a quick way of seeing all the dimensions. Quick. Your application has a list of neighbors to be notified.
Yes.
And I want to suggest that you add 3 names, 3 neighbors. Okay. The code says to notify everyone who can see, who has a good view of the proposed work.
Okay.
And there are a few that I think fall into that category that you didn't list.
Okay.
Sure. All right, 1 East Belvedere. And that's tax lot number that ends in 8-4-9.
Okay.
Six West Belvedere. Tax lot number ending in 8-3-12. And 2 Grandview Terrace. 8-3-29. Those are all properties where the owner is just simply in the front yard. They have a clear view of this front yard porch. Okay. So, to be on the safe side, protect yourself against them coming back later and saying we didn't get a notice.
No problem.
board members have any questions for the applicant, any comments? Looks like it's an admirably complete application. Really, nothing, I didn't see anything missing or anything further. The only thing, which is not mandatory, but we do encourage applicants to provide photographs of the, for the hearing itself later, when the hearing, just to enable us to have points of reference in the discussion. Photographs that show us the setting, give us a sense of what people will see, neighbors and passersby, what they see, and from different angles. And you could provide one set of prints, and then some electronic version that we could, whether posted online or emailed if they're not too big, but.
I've already done that. I will submit photos soon, and I can email them to you if you want to distribute them.
Okay. That's fine.
And
Yeah, the photos would show comparatively, of the other properties in the neighborhood, how the new porch addition would be similar to or be different from. One of the questions is, how does this affect the character of the neighborhood? So if you can show it's relatively consistent with what you might find elsewhere on the block. And also if you have, if you just get a Google Maps that we can look down, just get a printout of that. Or can relate to that.
Yeah, to have a sense of scale. I mean, this is mostly about the question of bulk. I mean, there's a construction extending into the yard, so it's really an issue of what is the impact of this bulk on the neighborhood. And, so general photographs and overhead view lets us get a sense of that.
Yeah, you can just judge from the photographs how other properties may or may not encroach, known to the inch or the foot, but you can see.
Yeah.
Right.
no problem. That's no problem.
Other than that, I don't see anything further.
Well,
Looks good.
okay for you, Steve?
It is.
All right.
To me, any photograph, the porch, we're not gonna see the porch in a photograph, we're just gonna see the space.
You'll see that, right? So what I'll do is I'll show a view from the front,
Mhm.
and then from here, from the road here, just to give a sense of context. And then I think your idea of showing some similar porches, I don't want to make the application kind of bloated, but maybe I'll keep that in my hip pocket in case, people are interested. In the public hearing, I can show similar porches if that's,
Right.
the drawings show what it looks like. And I think you all know Cold Spring well enough that you can judge how similar it is to
So we're not going to critique the design of the porch. It's more just whether
the scale.
yeah, encroachment into the yard is justified.
Yeah, one of the criteria is how does it impact the neighborhood?
Right.
And so you can only cross compare to what else is in the neighborhood part, so. That's part of it.
No questions for me, it is.
Okay. Let's think about the scheduling of the hearing. It's the next step in the public hearing. And we're required to give 30-day notice to the planning board for any comments they may have, and a 10-day publication notice in the local newspaper, which comes out weekly. We submit the notice this Friday. It will be published Thursday next week. So this, and 10 days after that, and the soonest we can have the hearing then is May 14th, the second Tuesday of May. Because this board meets on second and fourth Tuesdays. Now, unfortunately, I'm gonna I have a medical event that will keep me from attending that day. So are other board members available? On the 14th, does that work for you, and does it work for?
It works for me.
Okay. About the other three,
For a hearing?
May 14th. Just trying to see if I can't be here, can we still do it?
Well, we would be down to 3, so we'd have to have
They are
4.
on. Yeah,
Yeah.
all three would have to come.
Yeah. I'm available.
Okay.
Are you available? All right, so, that would be the hearing date, right?
That's right.
Okay.
So.
And John, you would be the acting chair, I assume.
Depends on
Yeah.
who, where.
Yeah, I would appoint.
Oh, I'm sorry.
John has the seniority, but I would appoint an acting chair, yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Oh, I guess that was, I was overstepping.
It's also, I guess it would need to be a unanimous,
She knows it.
vote
that's
then.
right, yeah,
Um, my gut feeling is I don't need to worry about that, but I don't know, should I be worried?
well, you have the option of waiting 2 more weeks. The next meeting will be the 4th Tuesday in May, the 28th. And I can be here then. What about other
Yeah,
people?
I'm available.
28th of May?
I'll shoot for the 14th. It's up to you guys, really. I'm not,
Yeah, just to let you know, so you explained that you'd have to have a unanimous.
Yeah,
Okay.
he knows that.
Okay, good.
So,
The 28th works, I think it just wanted to alert, I know you referenced the 14th, but the 28th is the
Okay.
Tuesday after Memorial Day. Right,
So people might be.
I am, okay.
Memorial,
Yeah.
really?
Am I making that up?
28th, May
Right.
28th. I don't think so. It's not on this calendar at least.
I'm sure my client would rather have it
Well, the
be done.
27th is Memorial Day. You're right.
That's fine. I'll shoot for the 14th.
Okay.
Yeah, the 27th is Memorial Day.
May 27th?
Yeah. So
Oh, wow.
probably not a good week, really. I don't know.
Well, he's fine with the 14th,
Great.
so let's set it for the 14th.
Yep, fine.
So I will, shortly, later this week, I'll email you guidelines about mailing the notices.
Okay.
And, along with the notice itself, the PDF you can print and mail. And, you'll also need to pick up a sign from the village clerk to post on the property, at least 10 days ahead of the hearing.
Okay. Great.
Um,
So I should try to get the mailing out by this Friday,
Well,
or,
it just needs to be out 10 days, postmarked or stamped 10 days before the hearing, so you have some reading.
okay.
It's not a rush. All right, I think that covers everything.
Do we do a motion to set the?
Oh, yes, all right.
Yes,
I move that we hold the hearing for this application on May 14th.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, unanimous.
Thank you.
Hey,
Okay, let's talk about, 5 Furnace Street. James, come on up, join the crowd.
Everyone. So James Hartford from River Architects and by Furnace Street. Unfortunately, when we had sent out our notifications, they were only sent out to the people that you had on that email list. And they didn't go to the adjacent neighbors, so I'm not sure if we can table the hearing for tonight until notification goes out to our.
Yeah, I'm afraid, that's a pretty cut and dried rule that
Yeah.
everyone has to have a notice, and you don't want people coming back and saying they didn't get a notice. Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Yes,
That's,
no, it's unfortunate, but I have the 4 that were sent out, but I could re-notify the 4 that were contacted. Or if we leave the hearing open, I think we could, extend it to, so that we make the other notices,
Well, I'm concerned it might not, to open the hearing at all, might
Mhm.
be a improper.
Got it.
When the grounds that have not been laid.
Mhm.
In accordance with the code,
Right.
so. Let's, I want to be safe, let's. Send new notices to everybody, and I will email you, an updated version of the notice. Which means, and it's gotta run in the newspaper.
Mhm, that's correct.
So that puts us back on the, May 14th, looking at a May 14th date at the soonest. And you probably heard what I was just saying to the previous applicant about, I won't be here probably. And so there'll be 3 members. But your application is, for 5 Furnace Street is a fairly straightforward one. It's
Yeah.
not, complex. So, you know, are you okay with having it on that date then?
That's fine, yeah. No, it's frustrating. We had the office manager send them out and she didn't actually respond. Just saw addresses and contact. So. It's always embarrassing to squirm over your own contacts, but, you know. But that's usually how it goes, but.
Better than your clients.
Well.
Yeah, she's gonna. Good, now hear from,
You
yeah.
just hear the hammer going.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's what, so, yeah, I look forward to seeing you three on the.
Okay. So we then do a vote that the hearing goes forward.
Okay, so I move that we change the hearing date to May 14th for 5 Furnace Street.
Second that,
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you, and I'm sorry for that. So,
That leaves us the next hearing. And that's on 133-135 Main Street. All of the necessary preliminaries were satisfactorily completed, so I will open the hearing for this
I am
application.
handing up,
Okay.
to the board
We
the
have
affidavit of sign
Affidavit of
placement.
sign placement indicating the sign, the notice sign was placed on the property in a timely way. The notice was published in the PCNR on March 27th. The application was forwarded to the planning board and that board responded with its recommendations. We'll get to those later. The mailing receipts were sent out to all the necessary addresses, and we have the stamped receipts. This proposal is a type 2 action under SECRA by default, and so it's exempt from environmental review. So that's everything that was necessary to get the hearing underway. So James, do you want to give us your, so we've had new facts and new sort of attention to or identification of relevant issues in the code that apply to this project. So why don't you give us your new take on 2 variances that are involved?
right. And, so just to state the variances, we're looking at, parking spaces and, percentage of lot coverage. So, yeah. So, since our first, workshop, the village board has, approved the purchase of the front yard area, so that's, improved the non-conformance, somewhat. So that's a good thing. But I think in terms of overall scale, the variance that we're looking for, and just trying to remember it. I'm just we're looking for a just under well, a 5.8% variance in lot coverage. so it's relatively minor. I think, in keeping with the neighborhood, helps in some ways with addressing issues like improving, handicap access to the, ground floor commercial. So I hope that the board agrees with me that it's a minor, request for that variance.
Can you just remind us of the numbers, of lot coverage, given the sale of the sidewalk?
Yes, so, so let's see. I hope I can figure this out. So I'm not 100% sure that this is reflecting of the, I think it's tabulated including the, addition of the sidewalk, area. So, our proposed lot area coverage is 40.8%. When, the zoning limits it at 35%. So hence the 5.8 difference.
Okay.
Are you familiar with, what lot coverage percentages might be in adjacent lots?
I didn't calculate that out, but it's, looking at Hudson Hills, their building is a very similar construction and extends quite far back where the kitchen is, to the restaurant itself. So I would say that probably exceeding our lot area coverage, and certainly is because it's a smaller lot for one thing, but it's, but as far as like the same overall proportion, it's pretty similar.
If this building is kind of at the transition point as you proceed from train tracks and work your way up. You go from buildings that are touching, literally this solid block of buildings, and then at about where this building is, they start separating a little more as you get into the more residential. And
Right, we have an alleyway, Hudson Hills, for example, is essentially, zero setback from the side yard at, well, the other front yard on Kemble. And it's exceeding the front yard of Main Street because the porch is built over, village property there, just like 133, 135 Main Street was prior to the purchase. And that's consistent up and down the street. But the area, the alleyway between, it's approximately 5 feet wide, is entirely on the property of 133 Main Street. And then the driveway that we have there is also entirely on the property of Main Street. Then the very next house's property is directly on the property line again. So, it's very high density. It's pretty consistent. This is actually a more open site than the neighbors.
And let's see, so that certainly is on the south side, right, as you're going up Main Street.
Yep.
On the north side, it's just maybe a little bit different than that, only.
On the north side, it's, so we're looking at, like where the Silver Spoon was, and Pizza Joint.
They're
Very
close.
higher density than
Right.
actually what we have on the other side. And similar backyard situations. The endless scheme is further up, but kind of, and that has more, that has all of that parking there, so it's not a really good comparison. But then catty corner is the Angie's Bake Shop, and then down to Paulette's and the other things. It's 100% filled out there. So yeah, it is a transitional kind of property. Even just turning the corner onto Kemble, that's got very high density too. The former workers' housing. I actually, the first year that I lived in Cold Spring, I rented a tiny little house. The one that basically kind of shows a driveway to the back of Hudson Hills now. And that one has zero rear yard setback. It's literally backs right up to my client's property. So incredibly size then.
So, yeah, so the backyards of buildings on both sides of the street from, say, Kemble and Garden going north, just basically where you are and right across. They're not that, they're built up pretty much close to their back lines too, right?
Yeah, I haven't done a complete survey of exactly what their backyard conditions
So
are.
it seems like it's all relatively consistent with the neighborhood.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's no neighbors here, nobody here for the hearing.
Well, he was gonna check later, but,
Okay.
are there any members of the public, attending online?
There is. Actually,
Thanks.
meeting room,
While she checks, can I ask you a question?
Mhm.
Dating back to, I think it was an email from March 15th, and this may not be relevant whatsoever, but I'm just, as I'm staring at this. When you reference the hammerhead, noting that the hammerhead at 90 degrees to the driveway will help turning vehicles so that they can enter, what is the hammerhead?
That's just a term for a 90-degree turn in the driveway.
Okay. So
Yeah.
it's not that there's a specific something I need to be looking at in the
No,
map,
no.
this reference or drawn out, okay.
And I actually have a sketch here that shows that concept here, so as I come talk about parking next.
Yeah, okay.
That's the next variant.
Yeah,
Okay.
so we do have, Hillary Hart, she is a member of the planning board.
Okay, great.
She's online. Outside of that, in terms of any comment received by the village hall, we've received no emails, letters,
No written comments.
verbal comment, nothing received. So.
All right.
I was contacted by my former landlord, who was at a different mailing address than where the notice went to. And I forwarded the notice to him by email, so he's aware of it too.
Okay, so you've explained, about, one of the variances, which is the lot coverage. And how, the applicant is seeking 40.8% coverage, whereas the code requires 35%. We're supposed to take into account the question of whether, you could have achieved what you were seeking without a variance. Is there a way to obtain the desired result without going outside the code requirements?
A big part that's driving it is the addition of the covered porch, which gives us much safer access to the Main Street entries. Currently, as you know, Main Street slopes towards the river, and all of the entries that are straight on all have a slope, and they're actually a major cause for ambulance calls in the village as people fall on them. And so the design turns the entries to be parallel to Main Street. So from the left and the right, you can see in the drawings, we have steps that now are flush with the grade at those two changes. There's actually more steps on the right-hand side than the left-hand side because of the grade difference. But now we're able to accommodate that in a much safer way. And then it's covered entry into the space of, people and stuff like that too. So
Going to need to vote separately on the two variances. I suggest that we wait to discuss and vote on this first variance until he finishes presenting the second one in case there's some overlap in our thinking. So why don't you talk about the parking question?
Great, okay, so parking, so the village zoning change has taken us from a very straightforward, okay, we can have a driveway long enough to accommodate 4 cars, no problem, right? So my initial application showed that because that's what I was used to showing. And then the code now does not allow for the use of driveways for commercial parking. And Eric and I had discussed via email that, well, if we don't have a driveway going to anywhere, couldn't we at least call the terminus so that a parking space? So, so there's one space gained, if you agree with me on that. And then the discussion in the planning board was that they're very concerned about not providing adequate off-street parking. And I agree with them. And so then the discussion of the hammerhead came up to do a 90-degree turn so that we can get 2 spaces at the terminus of the driveway. So I think that is an easy solution to get 2 spaces. It impacts the yard a bit, but so one less hassle for parking. But I would also request a variance to allow us to use the driveway for the remaining 2 spaces that are required. We need 4 overall, 1 per dwelling unit and 1 per commercial space because the size of the commercial space. So that is my request.
Did you say you have a new drawing that clarifies what you're proposing?
Yes, so,
It should be attached.
Oh, it's already here.
yeah. Did I email that to you?
It's part of an email.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, I had that one, yeah.
That's
It's easier in red and, yeah, I read, they can use it too.
Good, though.
Thank you.
So, are you saying that the 2 spaces in the back, meet, the norms of parking, of satisfy design, standard norms for parking spaces?
Yes.
Someone can get out of either space, even if there's a car in the other space?
Yes, it's, it's a challenge, but yes. You can see the outline of the dash line, and the car that's kind of drawn in, that's a standard parking size right there. And so those, that's just, like parking lot sign dimensions.
I just cannot envision how cars get in and out of there.
It's, it's backing, it's not ideal.
Would you just show me on, I'm sorry, I just can't envision it. I can't envision how cars go, sort of, if there's a car is parked here. So this is Main Street, right?
Yes.
If the car is parked here,
Yeah.
No, I agree with that. Yeah, no, these 2 would have to be moved to allow, I thought you were talking about that one.
oh, yeah, no, I get
Yeah.
these, I don't understand.
Um,
this. Okay,
Let's kind of take it in
Okay.
stages and talk about, the code says that, to be valid, a parking space must not block other spaces or be blocked itself. There must be continuous access for a space to be a valid parking space. So we're gonna start by looking at what do we have that meets that requirement.
Can I offer just one more thing? Sorry to interrupt. That 2 spaces are required for residential and then 2 for commercial. Now, commercial, we can assume we're going to be there during normal business hours. So, and that they would be there, they would be present if their car's there. So, if the residences get these spaces as designated spaces, then the 2 commercial spaces, the owners of those cars can be asked to move them. It's an inconvenience, but that's what you get for having the convenience of parking too. So
Not and different from what a lot of the village already does.
it's my office is run,
Right.
But the idea is that the 2 that are farthest in qualify as valid parking spaces. And
Mhm.
they have, assuming there's nothing in the driveway, they have, they don't block each other. And then the variance would, affect the other two required spaces.
What creates community?
Yeah. And I will also offer that this is in the walking distance of the village, you know, close to the train.
So there are two residential units up above, right?
Yeah.
There's not three, there's just two.
Correct. Two above, two below. Let me just back up a little bit in that explanation. Currently, the structure is configured as a single family that includes the first floor half on at 133, and then extends over to include the entire upstairs. And then the lower floor on at 135, the uphill side at the first floor, is a commercial space now rented to a real estate broker. Previously it was Wine Shop. And so our idea is to make them two commercial spaces that are similar in layout, mirrored over, you know, down the center. They potentially could be rented as a single unit, but you know,
A single commercial unit.
Yeah. And so then the upstairs are, instead of it being a single family, that there'd be two 1-bedroom units.
So, board members, one path, he's asking for a variance that affects the definition of a parking space. The code defines a parking space as something with continuous access, and he's asking for a variance to that aspect of the definition. A second path that we could consider is to waive the requirement of 4 spaces. The parking table calls for 4, and we could make a variance from that requirement and say 2 is sufficient, and then count these 2 at the end of the driveway as those. And a third option is for the board, ZBA, to refer the issue to the planning board, and then the applicant would ask the planning board to recommend to the trustees that they issue a waiver of the two missing spaces. That's the third, that would be the third path to approval. In other words, for the ZBA to say this is more of a matter for planning for the trustees. Keep in mind the whole, I mean, parking is a relatively large question, and with implications that go beyond just any one property. And it's a topic that is evolving right now, because there's now a whole new program for parking in the village, new restrictions. So, in which the trustees have designed after years of work and thought. So it's something that entails a lot of considerations, possibly more than the ZBA should take on. But that would be the argument for path number 3 that I mentioned.
What has typically been done? I can tell you this, while you know, I think we've only seen this once before in my
I haven't seen any, I haven't had any questions involving parking, any applications yet. I mean, you've been here a lot longer than I have. Normally, in the past, applicants with this type of problem go to the planning board and then get referred to the trustees for a waiver. And that was an option under the old code, and it still exists in the new code.
I think that's what happened the last time.
In my, meeting with the planning board, and please Hillary, or Karen, if you can, correct me if I'm wrong. There was a, considerable amount of concern about not providing adequate parking on the site if possible. So, planning board member, Ben Chia requested that we really look at the best options possible to situate parking on the site. So that's why I kind of reverted back to trying to show for cars on and asking a little bit more, because I did take it off after our initial meeting. But to address those concerns, which is a very valid concern, and since the parking on Main Street has been affected and the side streets through the metering, I think it's more of an issue now than ever. So,
Well, my take on it would be that the onus would be more on the owner to have to keep moving cars. If we waive the continuous access in and out, then the owner has to deal with that. It could potentially get more cars off the road. And the burden becomes to the owner itself,
Which, you mean the owner of this property?
right?
Well, it'll be tenants in there, I gather, so it'll just be,
It'd be tenants and the owner, and I don't know how that would probably affect rentals too. I'm saying that it would just go to the detriment of the owner one way or the other, including the tenants who rent.
Well,
There might also be an issue of constantly backing in and out.
keep, one thing important to keep in mind is, no matter what we say, no matter what the ZBA says, no matter what we call these spaces, it has no bearing, it has no binding effect on what people will do. They don't have to do, they can do whatever they want, no matter what we call these spaces, they're still free. There's no law, no rule that requires them to park. We say this driveway counts as 2 special spaces, there's still no law requiring them to ever park in the driveway, they can park on the street all they want. So, in other words, just our saying the driveway counts as 2 spaces does not mean that's 2 fewer cars on the street. Because there's nobody there, there's no enforcement, there is no requirement that anyone follow what we just said.
Right, so, but your point overall on that?
Is that it's there, it's in a way, what we say is just semantic with no, we, in making our decision, we should put foremost, not the semantics, but the real effect in real life, the practical effect, human behavior. Like, just because we call something 2 spaces, and we can't pat ourselves on the back and say we've created 2 parking spaces if people aren't actually going to use them. We should be looking at what people are actually going to use. And so if we are convinced that people will really follow this and really have 4 cars there, then that's good. That's to me, that's the essence of the decision is
Well,
not,
it can happen under that circumstance, and the question is if you, well, I say if you waive or you grant a variance for 2 spaces, they'll park there in the same way because it's just a waiver of 2 spaces. It's just, it turns out to be the same. But at the same time, you're really not granting a variance. You, in this case, and maybe in some way, if you do the continuous in and out, if you simply say that, we waive that portion of it comes out the same result, right?
exactly, that's what, when I outlined 3 paths, I think path 1 and 2 are essentially the same thing. It's just, there's a semantic difference. In both cases, I think we end up with basically 2 usable spaces. And,
The other thing is, if you only have 2 parking spaces and they're parking 4 there, is that a violation?
and parking what?
You
Four
only
cars.
grant 2, you waive 2
Oh,
of the
it's not a
requirements.
violation, no. People can use their driveway, it is not, there's no, far as I know, there's no.
Well, that's why I'm
nothing-
thinking, if it's not continuous in and out and you're parking forward there, then it is an issue. According to the code.
Not
because-
according to the code, no. If we grant them 2 spaces and waive the other 2, they can still line up all the cars they want in this
Mhm.
driveway, 6 cars if they'll fit.
Right.
I mean, that's their driveway. They're free to do that.
Mhm.
And nobody's gonna ticket the backyard.
Yeah, but the point I'm getting at is, would that still violate the definition of
No,
parking?
wouldn't violate anything.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, there's like a disconnect, there's a,
Mhm.
You're saying as long as you grant 2 variances?
Yeah.
That's what you're saying, but as long as you're doing that.
as long
You're not, in this circumstance, you're not declaring that you have 4 parking spaces, you're granting a variance for 2.
Right, we're not looking for 4, just 2, right? If we accept it, because they were parking.
Right, that's what I'm saying, so. I'm just saying, so if you only grant 2. And they park 4 in there. Would anybody ever come in and say,
No.
we don't have continuous
No.
access in and out?
that's there between them. I mean, they would have to work that problem out for themselves.
Right, it's been resolved already, yeah. I will offer that on a snow, like snow parking day limit, when
Oh.
parking is limited, people will park their cars there, they will
Oh,
manage,
yeah.
and if it's a Saturday afternoon and, all foliage, they'll work out parking so that they're in there, particularly now with metered parking on Main Street, so.
So I appreciate what you said about the disconnect, because the disconnect is from what gets approved on paper and then how people are gonna behave.
Right.
And people are gonna park there.
Right.
Whether or not we say there's, or anybody says those are parking spaces. People will, I call it creative parking, people are gonna park there.
So what's
So I
happening here,
understand what you're saying.
Okay,
in this project here, what's happening here is we have. More use of the building by, maybe 2 commercial spaces or 2
Mhm.
residential spaces, so it's amped up from what it was before.
Yeah, but I
Right.
think the
And
change in zoning has allowed, I don't think there's a change in the number of required parking spaces from the old zoning code, if I recall correctly. And the number of required cars were dropped because, I think more were required for dwelling units. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah.
But I think it's in that serial.
And so the reason why you even mentioned the continuous in and out, why did you mention that?
well, that's a good question. We should just, for the record, remind ourselves what the code says, so we know factually what we're dealing with. This is 134-17, M. I believe. Off-street parking. So the code talks about what counts as a parking space. It says you need X number of parking spaces. Well, what's a parking space? Areas computed as parking spaces. So and the size of space, 162 square feet. Shall be required for one parking space exclusive of areas required for access and maneuvering. So, when you're determining the size of your parking space, you
You
cannot.
can't count where you'd have to be able to get in and out.
Can't count access.
That's right, so that makes sense, so that's what that means.
So you can't.
So as not to violate that, then you only have 2 parking spaces and you waive the other 2. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to say what you're saying, you wouldn't be able to call it a parking
Well, we
space.
would wait, the alternative is to waive what I just read. And give a variance.
Well, I heard, yeah,
Say that, well, we're gonna give a variance for that, and then that's, paragraph 3. Paragraph 4 titled access says unobstructed, this is the more actually the more direct relevance, unobstructed access to and from a street shall be provided. Such access shall consist of at least one 10-foot lane for parking areas.
Well, that's very clear. And so,
So we would give a variance from that too,
Mhm.
to allow this configuration.
right, and that one variance could be to 4 spaces even, or to 1. I mean, it's just a variance off of that requirement of unobstructed pathway to and from.
Yes, we would say that.
You would only have 3 that could potentially be blocked under the circumstances, because
Right.
one would.
Right, one would always be, the farthest one to, closest one to the street would always comply, would always be legal or valid.
So anyway, it is a requirement, so it has to be addressed one way or the other, so we either, it depends on what we're gonna do, right? If, my feeling is this, if you say you have 2 parking spaces and you waive the other 2, then the assumption is that you have an unobstructed way out, because you're only
Right.
requiring 2 and you're waiving 2.
Right,
And that's how that theory works. And so the other thing is, what would this decision do for other situations that are comparable? Will we even run into it?
well, that's good. We definitely have to be, our thinking must be, scalable. It's gotta be coherent for future applicants. There could be parallel. Let's, kind of pause and
I
take
mean,
a.
what if it's the issue of emergency and sort of police necessity to be able to get
That I don't know.
people in and out? If you're looking to try to move a car because somebody in a residential unit is having an issue and that's their vehicle.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's not being referred to the emergency services for that review. I mean, that's typically like driveway applications.
Yeah, I'm just talking hypothetically.
Yeah, but
You know, the way they might look at us
Yeah.
for having done this.
Mhm.
You know, did you consider that there could be an emergency? Did you consider anything like that?
There
So-
could always be a car parked in this driveway. I mean,
So here's the other theory, to get away from that. So it doesn't sound like the better of the 2 things would be to grant a variance for 2. And then the owner becomes responsible for their own conduct.
why would, emergency situation why would this parking configuration create a problem in an emergency?
Well, I'm just saying, if the residential unit had the parking space back here and there were other cars blocked there.
but you would call an ambulance if you.
You're saying if someone had to get out right away because their
For whatever reason,
spouse was,
I don't know, I mean, there could be probably 100 reasons. I'd have dwelt on it too much, but
yeah, maybe that is a, and you're saying all 4 cars were here, and so somebody couldn't get out, and they, hold the village liable for approving, but
But it seems like there's so many places in the village that don't have anything along the side for an emergency vehicle to get in. And they're gonna be on Main Street
Yeah.
and they get.
I'm not
you
even
know,
talking about emergency vehicle getting in, I'm just saying,
Oh, okay.
if the owner is trying to get
I think
their
you're saying
person,
one of these cars
rather than
needs
calling
to
an
get out.
ambulance, I don't know.
Oh, I hear what you're saying.
But-
Oh, needs to get out.
Just call an
Okay.
ambulance
Or,
under the circumstances, so I don't know, I would be
I think,
inclined.
the village's defense would be, it's not illegal to park 2 cars lined up in a driveway.
Yeah.
And they can already do that. Anyone can already do that.
Right, so I guess under the circumstances, I think the best thing to do to get away from semantics and to say we do a variance on the ability to have a continuous access in and out and just go with a waiver of 2 parking spaces, but then the question is what will that do down the line?
Let's, take a look. Is there, Karen, a printout of the planning board's memo?
It should be attached.
Yeah.
Because what I think that does, what I really think that does, if you're doing a variance of the language, you're basically rewriting the code. And I don't think we should do it. We gotta give a variance. We gotta give the variance if anything.
Well, that's it.
That's it, Mary.
Yeah, that's it. That, making an exception to the number is also rewriting the code in some. Right? The code says you need 4 spaces.
Well, no, you're giving a variance from it, but you have to justify it as to why you're doing it here and not in other places. That's really what it comes down to in the end.
It applies to lot area coverage and
Pardon?
lot area coverage or front yard setbacks and then appeals.
As always with any variance, we look at the unique character of this application and find out if there is something about that that justifies the exception in this case. Some reason that doesn't apply to generally to everyone.
Yeah, I just think. You know, I think to do, put a variance on the language of continuous in and out, it's just basically rewriting code and so.
Legislating.
Yeah, it really is and it's a direct effect in that way. It's not even implied. It just. And one thing we don't do as a board is we can't enact anything, and that's so you're changing the language. What you're doing is you have to look at what they say, and if we grant 2 spaces, those 2 spaces have to have access in and out. The other 2 are waiving, and that's it.
Let's, now that we've laid our preliminary thinking out, let's read what the planning board said. And maybe it'll help crystallize a little bit. I'll read it out loud. It's not that long. Cold Spring Village is at an inflection point with regard to parking. Many stakeholders are experiencing a parking crisis and are struggling to regularly find parking. As we know, the village government is creating new standards and tools to remedy this, as well as preparing for imminent externalities such as the Fjord Trail. These tools include implementing a parking plan and system of meters and permits, as well as recent changes in the zoning code. Careful enforcement and management of the zoning code around parking is crucial, especially as we deal with an overwhelming amount of tourists now and in the future. We are still left with a basic capacity issue of a lack of parking spaces, especially during peak times. With regard to 133-135 Main Street, the following comments concern the applicant's desire to provide, quote, less off-street parking than specified in village law, requiring a variance from provisions 134-17M, close quote. First, we ask that any variance issued should be with respect to a specific use's parking requirement, in this case, retail use and residential use. In the code 134-17M, we see a review on parking is meant to be tempered by an understanding that off-street parking, quote, off-street parking regulations alone cannot address all parking and transportation challenges, close quote. Furthermore, the code's intent is to, quote, meet resident requirements and support commerce while discouraging excessive use of vehicles, close quote. Given that framing, we, that is planning board, strongly discourage the reduction in parking requirements for residential use. Doing so would put an unnecessary burden on residents of Cold Spring, especially the eventual residents of the residential units at 133-135 Main. With respect to the retail use, while we believe granting the variance could be directionally supported by the code's intent of, quote, discouraging excessive use of vehicles, close quote, the board feels that every effort should be made by the applicant to meet the required parking spaces as specified in the code. We also note that this relief could be achieved, and in fact has often been achieved, by requesting a parking waiver from the village board via the planning board. I would add one thought to that. They point out the difference, the fact that we have 2 uses here. And it's worth remembering that the residential users of the space, the occupants of the apartments, will be eligible to get permits to park on side streets. And so they are in a better position than the commercial tenants, which are not eligible for any special parking treatment from the village. So, it's something to keep in mind as we think about how these spaces are needed or used.
But to get those permits, it would also increase the parking on the street.
I think there are less parking spaces.
Yeah.
Living it, yeah.
The way I read this, it's almost, they're saying that providing for residential parking is a priority over business parking. Is
Right.
that-
And that,
You
that's
read
what,
it that way?
yes, they seem, well, exactly, he exactly says that.
Yeah.
We discourage the reduction for residential use.
Yeah,
So but I'm just saying,
right,
in a way, it worked contrary to that is
yeah,
is the notion that the residential users will actually have this escape valve in a sense, which.
Well, another theory is if, so this can be alternatively, like you say, one residential unit or two, potentially, right? No more than two.
Yeah, right, 2 residential units, 2 single bedroom residential units upstairs, and 2 commercial spaces on the ground floor, potentially combined into one.
Right. So I'm thinking if there could be, from the design and application and the use of whatever the planning board approved, it would be 2 residences, potentially, obviously, and no more. And that would allow for 2 parking spaces, that covers that. And the idea with the commercial is that people just, the delivery truck can, come in here real quick, drop things off, and then disappear. I mean, they're not gonna be hanging around for any length of time. That's one theory, and it just, the notion is they're right in here in the center of the village. I'm trying to think of ways to accept all this, and to variance purposes. Is that, everything's done on foot, train, whatever. They're trying to decrease parking on the street, but at this point now, they have enforcement, number one. Number two, they collect, which is they didn't have before, but now they collect, meter time and everything, so it gets people to move the cars. So it's not like you're just gonna be parking a car in the street and leaving it there. So if you are, I mean, I don't know, do they give the commercial tenants permits, for parking?
No,
It wasn't offered to my office.
no, the village does not have any permitting system for commercial.
Yeah, so the point is, it encourages income to the village to have off, on-street parking for the commercial operators as well as visitors.
Live upstairs from where you work.
James, when you said 2 commercial spaces, potentially 1, are you building for 2? And you're saying in the future, someone might combine?
Yes,
Okay.
it's an option,
So you are building,
but yeah, the proposal is for 2 spaces, yeah.
why don't we see if, there are any comments from the public? If anyone attending online has anything to say? No, I guess not. Okay.
Should we check with Hillary specifically, or just
Well,
we recognize that
it-
she's on?
as long as she clarifies if she's speaking
Okay,
as a
does she have a
citizen.
mic that we might not hear her,
She should hear, I'm sure she can hear us.
but is she muted that she can't respond to us?
She can unmute if she wants
Okay,
to.
okay,
We
just checking.
we haven't muted her.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all I'm asking.
All right, no comments from the public, either in person or by writing.
This is interesting.
Oh, yeah, the guy anyway.
Well, no,
Just has some-
well, we flushed, I think we flushed it out. I think it's just a little dangerous that if you waive the continuous access in and out, you're doing it all for all 4 spots. Whereas if you just if you grant 2 variances, you're not doing that. And they can do what they want. We're not, the thing is, they can do what they want. I get it. So I think rather than us affect with our interpretation 4 spots, we just deal with 2 and they have them outright and they can decide how they're going to
so,
work with the rest. I mean, obviously, we're granting something. What does that do down the line for other people coming in?
so we could, as the zoning board, say to grant a variance to say, okay, you just need to have 2 spaces for the residential unit.
Yeah, and I checked with the village attorneys on that point, because I know that power is also assigned to the trustees.
Right.
And I wanted to make sure that we were permitted to have the same power, and he said definitely both. Both boards can grant effectively the same relief,
Okay,
and applicants can choose which they go to, or they could go to one after the other. But yeah, we can grant a variance from the requirement of 4 spaces and say you only need 2 in this case.
And then try to get clear as to why we're just granting 2, so we know how to compare it when we're looking at another
Well,
place.
I think the reason, as I would put it, is, it's because of the density of the proposed project. 2 apartments and 2 stores, in what was previously, less dense. So that's why we have this.
Dense in
heavy-
use, not dense in footprint.
In units, dense in units. Which is why we have this heavy parking requirement on a typical small village lot. And so, the possible rationale for waiving the 2 spaces is to say, this project is uniquely, it's uniquely possible to have this density in this project. Density is a good thing. It's a benefit to the community to have more small compact housing, which is
Mhm.
more affordable, to have compact, affordable commercial spaces. That's all a benefit, which helps outweigh potentially any harm caused by the greater traffic, the parking spilling out onto the street, which will probably happen, no matter what we say.
And it's a small zoned lot to begin with.
Well,
It could be different elsewhere. But even though most of them are about the same,
the
but
smaller the lot, the better. Well, I don't know, that gets into created issue.
well, it could,
Right.
well, that's why it could be denied too, but I mean, the fact that it is a situation we're trying to deal within a confine.
Well, yeah, you could say then.
Maybe it was self-created to, yeah, you built out, right, exactly.
and also just it's, a benefit to the community to have this lot reconstructed and improved, and instead of, falling down, it's going to be a new structure that provides great business spaces and residential spaces, and I mean, that's a huge benefit to our community and to Main Street, and I think that balances a lot,
Of course, they could fix the building up just as well by putting in 1 apartment and 1 store. And then still fix the
Oh.
building up and then have,
Right,
which is
true.
which is what their parking allows them.
yeah,
So,
Go
go ahead.
to that point, there are two issues there. One is that by converting the current ground floor residential use to commercial space, it's actually more conforming to the new code.
Character of the
Mhm.
neighborhood.
And also the project viability by turning it basically from 2 rental opportunities. It's now 4, so it's now more viable for the owners to do the project.
Yeah.
Invest in the cost.
Yeah.
Well, that's a little more tangential. It is a positive fact.
Well, to your point, it makes the project viable to.
Well, that's, we could just
share in the project.
look at it.
It's more affordable.
Yeah.
To a resident.
Exactly.
That's another thing.
Mhm.
Both ways.
Typically Hudson Hills as an example, the wait staff lived upstairs, and they walked downstairs to work, we should encourage that.
Another rationale that may be convincing is the character of the neighborhood argument. That's a major factor that we have to keep in mind, and in a sense, this building is being moved in its use, in its style, from the residential end of the spectrum more toward the commercial end. In a way, it's joining the farther western end of Main Street, where it's heavily commercial buildings are packed together, there's no parking. Many commercial buildings have no parking at all. Hudson Hills doesn't have any parking, so it's a restaurant there with no parking.
Right,
And hotel. Yeah, restaurant and hotel.
And across the street,
Across the street.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
hotel
Oh,
across
yeah.
the street with no parking.
Right.
So that's.
Takes Hill in, right? I mean, that's what
Well,
you're saying.
No,
there you go.
That too, yeah.
They do it.
They have
Cold
like
Spring.
3 spaces.
But across the street, there's a
B&B.
hotel with no
Right.
parking, so, that is the character of the core business district. This property sits right on the
Mhm.
border of that zone, in a way, the project causes the property to kind of join the neighbors on that side, where parking is not inherently
Available.
available and, expected, and so that's, to me, that's probably, for my mind, the strongest reason, because it draws on that important quality of character of the neighborhood. Consistency in use and approach, architectural approach.
Yeah.
Scale.
Let me ask you, so you said you spoke to the village attorney about some of this?
Only the one question of whether
Okay.
we are empowered to waive the requirement of two spaces.
Okay, and didn't get into the issue, the discussion you brought up about the wording of continuous access and
No,
whether
I
we
didn't
waive
talk,
that.
I talked to him about that. I'm sure we can grant a variance to that.
That's
Yeah.
where I'm a
Well-
little bit more,
if we,
find it difficult to do.
Oh, because
if the requirement for 2 car, if we grant a variance to say you only need the 2 spaces for the residential unit, then the ingress and egress isn't a problem.
Right.
So we just have to do one.
so
Right.
it would only be the number of spaces.
Right.
In that case, the only variance is to the number of
Right.
spaces, which is the parking table. It's a variance
Yeah.
from,
Right,
Obviously, we're not gonna do it now, but I think that, that you might wanna ask the village attorney about that.
I guess you're saying it's not an area variance. If we alter that requirement about access, it's not an area variance.
No, because it's a requirement that goes to all 4 parking spaces. And it's, while it sounds like an area variance, you have to have the ingress and egress, it's more of a definition of what a parking space is.
Right.
So it affects all parking areas, and I just think I think it falls in line with what's legislation and what defines a parking space. And you can't, I don't think you can really tinker with that, you can really, I mean, I just know how they work with statutes, and when the statute is right on, you can't vary, a board or a court cannot go in and say, well, I think should be a little bit different, or should have done this, so let me interpret it this way. But if the language is so clear, you can't get away from it. We would basically be going against the language. So
I trust your instincts about that.
check with the attorney, I think he'll say the same thing, but
it's not an
I-
issue if we just deal with the number of parking
Right.
spaces.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's why I say just,
You're saying just the number, like just altering the number
Two.
from 4 to 2,
Yeah.
it doesn't raise the same.
no. Nope. I think that what it does is it leaves to the owner on how they operate this driveway, and they have to talk to whoever they have to talk to if anybody approaches them. But, we've done our job and just say 2 variances, meet the definition, the full definition of parking. And I don't think we can allow, saying like, oh, we'll say that there are 4 here. I think you run into trouble saying there are 4 here, and we're waiving the access part of it.
The interesting thing about it, commercials are not granted the parking permits, right? So the residents have an option. If somebody moves in who has a car, it is an ideal place for people who don't have a car,
Right.
right? But they do have the relief of buying a resident permit. And I'd say that's a better option than, say, purchasing, the payment in lieu of parking. It's just not, these are parking spaces that don't really exist in the village, right? It's a hypothetical. And so, a resident has the relief of being able to pay extra for it. It's like, okay, parking's not included with your rent for the residential units is possibly. And I know that's a little different from what the planning board is saying, but they do have the option, commercial doesn't, so interesting.
So are you saying you would prefer that we designate these two as commercial?
I don't know that it's necessary to designate, I mean, that may be more for the landlord to manage.
Yeah, I just think we just leave them as parking
Yeah,
spaces.
but I think the relief is that, the residents have a means of addressing it if they choose. But the commercial who doesn't have that option, has relief for their needs.
Yeah, because the definition of parking does not distinguish between commercial and residential parking. I mean, with regards to continuous
Right,
access, it's just, it's
right,
across the board
right.
article. But then I, just in case we come up with this again, definitely ask the village attorney. It's a good question, but I think it's pretty straightforward. So again, I think the only issue we're really considering here at this point is everything we've just been talking about is whether or not we can state clearly and plainly why we are granting two variances here in this case.
Why don't we return to the first variance and have a vote on that? And get that settled, and then come back to the next one.
Okay, so that being the lot variance of 40 point of 5.8 over the 35%.
Right, so let's run down the factors, the 5 factors, and see how they jive with this. We didn't really discuss the lot coverage issue. I mean, does anyone have any observations generally that, or questions for the applicant about?
If it can be done any other way.
Well, he did address that. The reason, the necessity of this slightly larger bulk on the lot.
Well, I think that was also explained too. I mean, you're getting the enclosed porch, but also, I mean, you don't necessarily have to enclose it to have the step down to get in, I don't think. But it is consistent with the neighborhood,
Similar
the porch, the
Mhm.
porch like that. So it just sort of blends in with the character of the neighborhood instead of looking a little bit more disjointed. I think it accomplishes a good thing where the steps come in from the westerly direction and the easterly direction, where they're not a difficult set of stairs to navigate on an angle because of the slope,
So
street
there's-
slope.
So they're safe, it's less of a safety issue.
Yeah, I think the
It's
slope,
also a
if
safety
this was flat property, I mean, I don't still think there would be much of an issue. I mean, in a sense that, because in this case, you're getting two good reasons why
Mhm.
you're expanding. First, you're taking advantage to create a similar styled structure to the other one, that's adjacent to it, but you're also improving the access, method of access. And it can be accessed from 2 angles. And is it, you said ADA,
Yeah, we have
Ramp
adding a ramp that comes around to the back deck.
For the businesses and the residences? or-
Just for the residences, the ramp will loop around so that the rear of the commercial spaces are accessible to the public.
because it's not covered, so it doesn't fall into like.
Right, that's not allowed
Yeah.
area coverage, yeah.
So,
But that's the only change is up front, what you just pointed out, porch.
We're adding steps and, that's.
Oh, is this enclosed? These steps aren't enclosed.
No. There's a slight bit of opening there, from the upper floor, but that doesn't count in the.
But it already overhangs.
Yeah. Mhm.
You're not building that in, are you?
Well, no, we're rebuilding that in the back. Exists and we're extending this bit here. And so there's a cantilever, but it's the ground plane. It's taking a ground plane though, right? So.
Right.
Yeah. So
Right.
it doesn't count.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's what we spoke about last time.
I think it's noteworthy that the design conforms in the side setbacks and the rear setback are conforming. So the property, although bulky for the side of the lot, maintains a breathing room from its neighbors. The added bulk has not come at a cost of of space on the sides and the back. That's helpful. So let's see here. First of the five factors is whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties created by the granting of this area variance. John, what do you think?
I don't think so. I just don't see it at all, and I think that the expansion, to the extent that it is 5.8%, serves the purpose of making the building more consistent with other buildings in the neighborhood and improves access.
So there are good reasons.
Yes,
Um, Mary Ann?
it's not a detriment, and I agree with what John said.
Eve?
No, I agree with both Marianne and John.
And I agree too. It's I don't think it would even be noticeable to the neighborhood. Number two, whether the benefit sought by the applicant can be achieved by some other method feasible for the applicant to pursue, other than an area variance. Mary Ann? Let's start with you because it's your favorite question.
Yeah, I always think I'm not an architect, so I don't know. Well, you could not cover the front, but then it wouldn't, it wouldn't be contiguous with the rest of the neighborhood,
Right.
so aesthetically, so I guess I would say no.
Okay.
I mean, right, that would be the only other option, would be to take the cover off the front porch. And then it wouldn't count, right? Would it?
Then it wouldn't count, right? If they remove the roof or remove the front porch entirely, that would
Mhm.
cut back. That would do it, but at a cost of quality and design quality and
Yes.
consistency with the
Yes.
neighborhood.
That's my words exactly.
Okay. Heath,
No.
okay, John,
Yeah, if they're dealing with such a confined space and area, I see no other way of doing it.
I agree with those points. And whether the requested variance is substantial. And I'll start by, so we're looking at a change from 35 to 40 point something, 40.8. I would say it's not substantial in its effect. I don't think that anyone would notice the difference. If the building was slightly scaled down to conform, it would be overall. So I say no. Eve,
Nope. I agree.
John,
I would use those terms, yeah, not substantial in effect.
okay. Mary Ann,
Not substantial.
okay. Number four, whether the proposed variance will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district. John,
Well, only if there weren't any gutters on the new and the downspouting out. I don't know, we maybe didn't look into that, but, I don't think it'll have a terribly detrimental effect, other than displacing a portion of the sidewalk where runoff would occur.
It's all hardscape right there anyway.
It's all hardscape, yeah, nothing to do about it. Let me see. I don't see, I mean, it encroaches a little bit more onto the sidewalk. But you have the neighboring building that does the same thing, so.
Yeah. I agree that the extra 5.8% is not going to tip the balance and create an adverse effect that wouldn't be there anyway. Mary Ann,
I agree.
okay, Keith,
I'm in full agreement.
number 5, whether the alleged difficulty was self-created. And I would lead by saying yes, in that the owner or the applicant was aware of the conditions, the constraints of the lot when the applicant chose to pursue this kind of design. So yes, it was self-created. Heath,
Yes, just self-created.
John,
In part self-created because it's on a sloped, sidewalk and you still had to deal with the issue with the steps. And-
Well, but
and it's been altered. It's been improved from what it was.
okay,
So I don't think it's 100% self-created because there were issues with the way the setup was.
Yeah, I almost made that comment to John's point, because I think so much of it is also created by previous this community village board decision, and that what exists today.
So I would agree with that, that it's not completely self-created because they're working with what was there.
so all the first 4 board members were unanimous in taking positions that support the application. The 5th factor was mixed. Overall, it's the voting was unusually strongly in favor of granting this variance. So given those results, I would make a motion that we grant the variance for lot coverage.
I would second it.
All in favor?
I,
Aye.
And I would do it, with maybe you might want to do maybe one full statement as to why.
Um, well, it's just simply that, the motion is that, the board approves, the excessive lot coverage because does not, violate the 4 most important factors. In particular, it doesn't, have a harmful effect on the neighborhood and, is not substantial. So,
Yeah, because we're just supposed to balance it. That's
Correct.
why I say that.
Right.
We went through the points, so now we're just
so
balancing
it's
it.
the balancing statement.
Right.
It's all, pretty much all on one side.
Yes,
So
I agree. For all the reasons
The only
we stated.
negative is that in some ways, the situation is self-created because the applicant knew about the nature of the lot. But that's a far lesser negative. So the vote was unanimous in favor of that. Which leaves us with the other variance. Let me just see, for sake of devil's advocate, if there is any support for the position that parking is too large, too holistic of an issue for the ZBA to unilaterally intervene in. And it requires a kind of higher perspective, such as the planning board and the trustees would provide, especially the trustees, because they're the architects of the new parking plan.
But the other thing is whether or not they can just simply override us if they feel like, I mean, maybe they're just wanting to hear what we have to say on it. And what's your take?
Well, I'm of two minds. I do think it is it's larger than the usual issues we deal with.
And it deals more with planning in part.
It has resonances across the village, unlike virtually anything else we deal with. Setbacks,
They're localized.
scale, they're pretty
They're
much
localized,
confined to the
immediate neighbors.
immediate neighbors. And, but,
Parking's an issue.
parking is, as the planning, board, and this is the gist of the planning board's recommendation is that we be very careful and they urge conformity, if possible. So that's, I'm just saying that is a potential consideration. It doesn't leave the applicant high and dry. It's not a denial. I mean, it's a denial of the variance, but it's not a dead end for them. On the other hand, the counter argument is, it's only 2 spaces. And we are entitled to grant the variance. If we feel strongly that the benefits justify the variance. The benefits being a worthy and a worthy development of the property in a way that addresses definite community needs.
Is this a matter where we can do both? Grant the variance, but propose that it be, give our opinion to the board, to the trustees.
Well, we have to give a rationale if we grant the variance.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we've all,
And then they, I imagine they could override us if they want.
Can they, I just have that question, can the trustees override if
Not the
they?
trustees, it would be the planning board.
I don't think they could override.
Not the 4 of us.
I mean, I don't know what the answer is, because it never really came before us, but I think because it deals with more of a planning issue and an issue that has been before Cold Spring in the biggest of ways, parking and car traffic, any traffic is and quite the topic. And that really deals with planning. And here we are dealing with a single parcel. We're not planning the whole thing. We're looking at what the requirements are and how this single parcel would contribute to the parking problem or not.
And I think the one thing that we do is we weigh the pros and cons, and in my mind, what I'm thinking of, the improvement of the site is of great benefit to the community. And we can weigh that against the 2 spaces. And honestly, I don't know how the planning board works, really. I mean, I'm not meaning to throw shade on what they do, but I'm just saying we do that constantly. We're always weighing the pros and cons of the benefit to the community and to the individuals, and trying to make things conform as much as possible. So I personally think that we are in a good position to make a decision, because we are just looking at one parcel, but within that, we're weighing a lot of the pros and cons within that.
And I think we get a little bit of leeway in doing this, because this property offers more in the way of parking, this commercial and residential building than many of the structures down towards the river, going down in the direction of the river. So there is an ability to cross compare. And as you mentioned, I mean, it's just about at this level going further up Main Street that it begins to transition into a little bit of a different type of use.
James, what is the status of this project vis-a-vis the planning board? Have they done everything that they need to do? Or do you have to go back to them again?
Leslie, I mean,
They
we had the
approved.
workshop and I think, I mean, they made the recommendation to come back to you, but, I'm not sure, honestly.
Yeah, I know that, Jesse went to the lawyer, after your workshop with them, went to the lawyer to discuss the, when a plan or proposal does not conform to the zoning code in every respect.
Mhm.
And he apparently learned that they are not allowed to approve a plan if it's not conforming or have variances. So I think maybe they have not formally approved it because up till now, it has been partially non-conforming plan.
Until you resolve that.
Possibly they're waiting for the variances from us and then did they raise objections to the scale, the size of the
No, they asked
number of
for
units?
things like, they requested the ADA ramp, which, it's just like, yeah, of course, and they also requested, fencing, and, to call out planting and enclosure for, trash cans.
Okay.
So those were, and then obviously the discussion on the parking.
Well, I think it's significant if they did not object to the scale, the number of units, because the parking burden, it flows naturally from the choice to have 4 units. And the planning board has apparently effectively signed off on 4 units. And you can't have 4 units without 4 parking spaces, so they are kind of a de facto approval of 4 parking spaces, which there isn't room for. So in a way, they're boxing us into a corner where we have to give the variances, because how else could we give them the 4 units? How else are they gonna get the 4 units that they approve of? Unless we waive these requirements.
And how would you characterize the letter that you read from the
As,
planning board? From Jesse?
As somewhat paradoxical in that sense, because they're urging
To keep the 4.
conformity, they're urging 4 spaces, but they've put their blessing on a 4-unit plan on a lot that doesn't have 4 spaces, they just aren't there.
Well,
They didn't object to the 4 units. That's pretty
It's-
cool.
so there are other buildings between here, building that we're talking about up, this before us, going all the way down to the river, that have as many units and or as, combined residential and commercial. I don't think there's any difference, and many of them probably don't have off-street parking. Do you know what the extent is, the number of buildings going up and down?
It's very low,
That do not, very low, those that do have
right,
parking.
correct. Yeah.
Well, again, I think, just looking at the character of the neighborhood, and the owner is willing to try to use the driveways they see fit, from what's already on the record. I think, I don't see any problem with, personally with waiving. I don't think we're gonna see too many other applications like this.
The unique features that justify, include, neighborhood character, the fact that this building, is,
As dense, and, in both residential and commercial use, and has probably as many spaces, if it's two, that I don't imagine many of the buildings have two.
yeah, it's already,
Right.
so being located where it is, it's easily assimilated into the core business district. And forms a continuity of neighborhood character with the core business, which was not true, it's not gonna be true of every building in B1. That's a unique, or a,
So what it says to me, it's not going to be necessarily egregious on our behalf to waive 2 of the 4. Even though it's a big request, I mean, just cross parity, unless we were to also argue from the other end that, well, the village is trying to go in the direction of more off-street parking, which is not a possibility because of the
It's-
constriction of lot sizes.
And the driveway requirement, yeah.
Yeah.
And-
Where
and
they
the-
find it.
In the driveway requirement, that's not just with this area, that's for all areas in the village. So it just so happens to have a greater impact in this case.
Another unique or semi-unique justification in this, with this property is that the high parking requirement flows naturally from the decision to create 4 units, a relatively high number of dense, small units. But that is a beneficial decision. It's for the community.
Mhm.
Yes, it's beneficial for the community to have those 4 units. It also allows this building to be a more economical, uh, rebuild.
Allowing a higher quality or
Yeah.
more thoroughgoing renovation. Because the applicant could have said, I'll just put 2 units in that building,
Mhm.
and then they would be able to have easy parking compliance, but the community would be worse off because parking would be fine, but they would lose apartment and a storefront.
One thing I didn't bring up is that we will not be using fossil fuels, and we're going to be heating it with heat pumps, and we don't put furnaces in it.
Okay. That's good, although
Can you put that in a parking space?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
gonna
why they
attract-
decided-
EVs.
Yeah,
As you were making notes prior to your mentioning that, I'm picking up the theme of sustainability here also. So, and then, I mean, from John's point, with economic viability to affordability to more breadth of community, diversity, et cetera.
And also getting away from driving a little bit, if that, I'm sure that has some kind of an impact of whoever comes in.
I'm gonna walk more likely.
if I can't get my car out, I'll walk.
Well, let's just see is there anything else that we can think of?
I think these are pretty solid. And to Eric's point, you point about the planning board, the congruency based on their decision with the 4 units. I think that's significant.
So the benefit of having the 4 units that are affordable and create an economically viable business would outweigh the negative impact of reducing the parking spaces from 2 to 4.
Right, because it all comes down to balancing
Right,
interest or harms, benefits versus harms, and that is the core of it. That justifies.
And, just as you already said, but just to make sure it's said, that it's already been approved for the type of use that
Yeah.
we've talked about, so we're looking at those constraints in dealing with that as well, because this has already been authorized. And what we're doing is we're following the definition of a parking space. And so we are led in the direction of granting a variance for 2 of the spots.
Well, I'll make a motion that we close the public hearing, assuming board members have no further questions for the applicant.
Nobody's online who's been
Right.
listening to this separate
And there
variance
have
request.
been no hands raised from the public.
I second that motion.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Public hearing is closed. We've had a pretty thorough discussion. Are we ready to go over the 4 factors?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
On this particular. Number 1, Whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties by granting area variance. So, and that's, allowing, allowing this project to go forward with only 2 parking spaces on site. Mary Ann? Undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood.
Well, possibly, but I think it's balanced out by the desirable changes in the neighborhood. So I don't, it's not a yes or no to me. I don't know how to say yes
Yeah,
or no.
this, yes,
Because the detrimental impact is, okay, there aren't parking spaces for the village and more cars roaming Main Street looking for a place to park, but I see it as balanced out by,
would you say just balanced or outweighed?
or outweighed by the positive impact on the community. neighborhood.
I'll answer with a firm no, having heard Marianne's argument.
So you say no,
No
no net
undesirable change.
undesirable, no undesirable
that-
change.
Yeah.
Great. No net change, no desirable change.
John,
I would say in balance, that, sort of along the line Marianne had said, I think that the positives outweigh the negatives. The positives being you'd have fewer cars parked on the lot typically or generally. If it leads to on-street parking, they are collecting fees to do that. I think that the other thing, because we're just talking about the parking at this point, right?
right,
I just think it leads people to not use vehicles as much, and I believe that it keeps too many vehicles by being put on a small lot. And you're working within the confines of the definition of a parking, space.
yes, it's,
Mhm.
is that all?
Yeah.
Okay, I was gonna add on to that.
Go ahead.
By saying it's definitely, this, your comments are going in the direction that the zoning code has gone in, which is discouraging vehicles, encouraging other modes of transportation, and so this decision or this variance
Yeah.
is kind of, it's not going against the grain, it's not going against the tide of what we're supposed to follow. It's kind of, it's ahead of the game because it's supposed to have 4, but it's definitely going in the intended direction. But I do think, yeah, it's funny, this factor doesn't talk about net change, it just says undesirable change at
Mhm.
all. Doesn't
Yeah.
say like whether it's outbalanced by anything.
It'll just lead, the undesirable would be the potential, putting more cars on the street.
Right.
That's the potential, that's the impact, that's what would be perceived as undesirable.
Hmm.
And, I think that anybody who's in this property would, they'd be working around it. I just, there may be some people who don't bring a car, may not have a car, who, because they're right in a community here and they can take the train or do whatever they want. And I mean, it might not be the typical person, but I know some people who won't drive cars. They were on one of our boards.
Yeah, a new point just occurred to me is also, well, a parking lot that holds 4 cars is itself a detriment, has harmful effect, because it's unsightly, it's using space for nothing, like for just cars,
Yeah.
compared with other uses.
In a
that
dense
might-
neighborhood.
That might, right. So it's not like, if there was a lot for 4 cars there, that would be a pure gain. Number 2, whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by some other method feasible for the applicant to pursue, other than an area variance. I would start by saying, yes, but only through a radical scaling back of the project and putting to 2 units.
Which
scaling
would
it back
render it impractical.
Which
probably.
would have all kinds of, problems, create all kinds of problems. The planning board didn't tell them to do that. It would, yeah, it would be a complete upheaval and, not feasible, well, feasible only in the most narrow technical sense. So, yes, but only, with radical disadvantages. Eve?
And a loss of the advantages, I mean, that's, yeah,
Right,
the advantages of the 4.
well, that wouldn't matter because they'd be complying in parking, so they
Yeah,
we wouldn't care
yeah.
about the advantages. you know,
Oh,
wouldn't-
right.
Wouldn't need to cite them anymore. Eve?
I'm in agreement that it would be like a light yes. To your
Yeah,
point. Almost a, yeah.
Mary Ann?
Yes, but. What you said.
Oops, got that in the wrong place. Hey, John?
Well, yeah, not feasible. I don't think it would be feasible. I mean, nobody's really bought into that project, trying to redevelop it. They have, they basically made an application trying to figure out what the costs were to really build and renovate the full structure. And I think that, you know, nobody's done that. You know, nobody's seen the financial incentive to do it until this design has come around. And any other feasible ways? No, it's a limited size lot.
So not feasible as shown by.
Yeah, and
the
particularly,
absence of other-
and the density of where we're at, the density of the Main Street, you know, for small properties, which are predominantly walkable streets for commercial, and not open yards of residential properties. There's just restrictions of size everywhere. So,
Okay, number 3, whether the requested variance is substantial. John?
yes. And it requires 3, we don't write the rules,
Oh,
and it's, you're eliminating 2 spots.
Mary Ann?
yes,
Okay, Eve?
Yes.
And I would say so too. Number 4, whether the proposed variance will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district. Eve?
I'm gonna say no. I just think the net positive from this is significant.
Okay, Mary Ann?
no,
John?
Yeah, like Heath said, it like in
Yeah.
balance, you look at it in balance
Yeah.
on this one. For all the reasons we already stated.
mhm,
I would go against the grain and say, yes, there will be an adverse effect, physical or environmental. I mean, that's really, those terms kind of cause us to focus, it kind of strips down the question to a subset. And I think it happens to be the subset where parking dwells or automobile traffic dwells. And so there really is gonna be a, adverse effect on, traffic and parking, which are at the level of physical and environmental conditions.
On the surrounding streets.
Yes, the benefits we've talked about aren't really matters of physical or environmental, they're more social, economic. So I would say yes, purely on the physical or environmental. But
Because it'll affect more properties to have fewer spaces.
well, the effect that does occur will be narrowly physical and environmental,
How would it be environmental?
because, well, automobile traffic has an environmental impact.
Mhm.
People cruising, looking for parking spaces.
But if there were 4 spaces there, those cars would be there anyway.
they wouldn't
They wouldn't be cruising around or.
Okay, that's right, that's true.
yeah,
you're encouraging more walking.
maybe, Yeah.
That's the way I see it. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's why I said it's a mix.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
you know, Eric's seeing it from the point of view that clearly the village is stressed out by the whole thing.
Yeah.
So it's not fictitious.
My personal, well, actually, we didn't get to immediately.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, we did. I started.
You
Yeah,
started,
yeah.
you started it.
net positive.
Yeah, my net positive is also my own personal habits by living in this area and having my own parking. And the fact that I don't use my vehicle but maybe once every 2 weeks. So that's where I'm coming from, my own actual lived experiences within this vicinity.
And there's also parking for you.
Also, in addition, yeah. Yes.
So that, yeah, that reminds us of. It's not uncommon to not need parking very much.
Mhm.
And number 5, whether the alleged difficulty was self-created. And I would say, yes, again, for the same reason that the applicant, the problem here was apparent. At the time, that the applicant acquired the property. It's inherent to the scale of the property.
And the definition of parking.
Right.
Mhm.
So, yes, and the applicant chose to go ahead anyway and take on this difficulty, so, yes. And John,
Yes. You know. Again, it might not have been feasible, but you know, to build this out or anything or renovate under the circumstances, but still. There is the issue and there is the requirement. We didn't write the requirements.
Steve,
Yes, agreed.
Mary Ann,
Yes,
okay, so let's look back, number 1 is undesirable change, pretty much, there was agreement that, although there is undesirable change, it's outweighed by, positive benefits. So this is really one of the top factors, one of the top questions, is this balancing of harm versus benefit. Benefit to the applicant, benefit to the community, harm to the community. This is interesting because most of our applications, there's no question of benefit to the community. It's always just the applicant's interest. Applicant wants one thing, and then there's potential harm to the community. That's the way here. It's unusual in that there is actually benefit to the community as well as possibly harm, and that's kind of lends support to the request for a variance. So this factor comes down as supporting the variance. Number 2, achieving by some other means. We all agreed no, without absurd or radical disadvantages. And that supports the application. Whether it's substantial, yes, we agreement that, so that goes against, weighs against the applicant, the request. Number 4, adverse effect on physical or environmental. So that was 3 to 4, no. So that comes out, it's mixed, but it comes out predominantly supporting the application. And number 5, everyone said yes, self-created difficulty. So that goes against the application, but this is the weakest factor. It carries the least weight because it is virtually all of our applications involve self-created problems. So we have 2 support, 1 and 2, which are support the application. Number 3, substantiality is against. And number 4, which gets back to adverse effect, and that supports. And that's probably the other of the top 2. It's 1 and 4 are probably the key ones because they both involve adverse effect. And so does somebody want to propose a conclusion or a balancing statement?
Well, number one, it's a very tough question, the parking, right? There's no doubt, and it's substantial, the request for two variances. Parking is a big issue. Traffic is a big issue in Cold Spring, for the confines of Cold Spring. And at the same time, the design's been approved by the planning board. It definitely will be a benefit to have this building renovated right on Main Street, right on its most important street, most visited street. I think that you'll have at least a parking spot for each of the two residential units. The commercial might be a little bit more flying by the seat because they don't get permits or anything like that. And I think that it's in this building and its parking spaces, it is for everything that exists building wise from that location on down to the railroad tracks is as many spaces as any other one of those properties have, you know, it's certainly on average, if not even more positive than that. So, I think overall, and again, it's been mentioned that it allows for residing on the main street, and perhaps also on an environment level, helps keep people using their cars because they're right already in the area they wish to be in. And so I think it's a tough issue, but I think it marginally in this case comes out on a positive side to grant the variance, in my estimation.
Should we, I'm sorry, I just had one question. I just want to make sure that the record is clear that the planning board hasn't technically approved it yet. There hasn't been a public hearing or a vote, but
Do they
In
have to have
practice.
a public hearing on an application like this?
although they will, basically what they were doing was waiting to see what happened.
Oh, so we're just gonna give an advisory opinion? Is that what we're gonna do?
Well,
No,
no, how,
I guess the sequence of events is they cannot approve an application
That's
that
not
has
conforming.
variances.
Right,
Or
got it.
rather, that has, that it's not, that has in any part of it violates the zoning code. They
Got
can
it.
only deal with conforming projects. So first, that's why the applicant first has to come to us and settle the zoning issues, then go back to them and, but, so.
and then they will set a public hearing on
Okay,
that part of the application. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear because
okay,
that was the advice to them was to, let's see what the zoning.
So
board
they can go
does.
to a public hearing to say we're for or against what the zoning board said.
well, no, they won't address, they'll address the project. It's,
Okay.
they, public hearing, people might say.
Oh, for the overall aspect
For the
of
whole,
the project.
overall, yeah, the whole thing.
Oh, okay,
They need a.
I get it.
approval
Okay,
for
so
the
that
whole-
could weigh in advance, or against the fact that we would say it needs, two variances.
Someone could go and say, I'm against the project because, the zoning board is allowing them only 2 parking spaces, so it's gonna add to the traffic.
Got it, done, we're good, understood.
But, so, yeah, that's a valuable thing that you brought up,
Yeah,
just to.
because it's the sequencing that I guess
But I think.
that the planning board was concerned about how, you know, how these applications that are before all 3 boards and the board of trustees
Right.
for purposes of the purchase of the property, the sequencing, it's not something that happens, I guess, that often.
No,
With
but it's a big conflict, like I
applications.
said.
But this is a good example, I guess, of that.
Yeah.
So that was their decision to hold off on scheduling a public hearing until they got a sense of
Okay.
where the zoning board was.
So, yeah, I just think, yeah, so all we can draw, or all we can infer from the planning board is that in the workshop, they didn't raise
Object.
objections to the scale, to the number of units. And, the decision to approve must emphasize the unique characteristics of this project that, justify the variance. Characteristics that are not common, not shared generally. And,
What do you see those as?
um, uh, social and economic benefit flowing
Mhm.
from density.
And a restoration of the structure.
Mhm.
Sustainable.
Sustainable. Um. Housing, affordable housing, I'm assuming this, it'll be.
Workforce kind of, yeah.
Housing,
The unique position of the building at the transition zone between the dense core business and the more spaced out residential allows it. Essentially, we're kind of pushing the building or letting it get assimilated into the core business mode or style, and that's feasible for this building. It wouldn't be for one farther out.
mhm.
After all, right next door is a restaurant with 0 parking, and so it's not.
And it's a restaurant that people attend,
Right.
they visit.
Yeah.
Dozens of customers at a
Yeah.
time.
The driveway behind it is, belongs to the residential unit. The two Kimball.
So to insist that the immediate next property have the full panoply of parking is creating a rather stark divide.
Mhm.
Whereas really there could be more of a gray, kind of a gray transition from black to white.
Is this where the driveway is? Next door?
So this is the,
Not to bring up.
this is the back porch of the next door, and this is the driveway here, and this is.
They basically didn't get an easement, but then they couldn't park it. They have the same
And
issue.
then,
as you.
yeah, it's all driveway now. Nobody gets parking.
That's right. Well, you can make them park, like, you could give them an easement to park on your property.
So the parking.
Just trying to think out of the box. All right, so did anybody else want to say anything on the balancing?
To crystallize what the balance, what the elements of the decision are, that we haven't named yet. And I would phrase the decision as contingent on the applicant creating 2 valid parking spaces that comply with the code
Mm,
in terms of size and accessibility. Continuously, each of them continuously accessible to the street.
And that would be approved by the building inspector.
I mean, test checked.
Yeah, just simply
yeah,
saying
would have to-
contingent on it,
right.
you know, so that
Exactly.
that's all you have to say.
Like any of our contingencies that we build into resolutions, it received by the building inspector. It's up to that official to monitor. All right, well, so I would, say something like, the variance is approved, contingent on the creation of those 2 valid spaces. Um, Given that the, the, the project has a density and a scale that produce social and economic benefits. That would be lost if the project was scaled down. And, given the social and economic benefits that the scale of the project provides, other points, oh, and then, and which are in harmony with the character of the immediately adjoining core business district. That is, the density, the scale is in
Mhm.
harmony with
Yeah,
the
the density,
adjoining.
yeah.
And so that's
And
makes
how
it
about,
clear.
and you,
Yeah,
that you also included in there the fact that the building is upgraded. It allows, for
And
the investment.
exactly, and which permit,
There's an upgrading of the building because of the permitted use. And while you were also restricted by the size of the property for having, you know, the 4 spaces, but the building would not be upgraded. I don't
considering
think.
it's a wreck and needs a huge.
Yeah, I think it's you know, it's pretty much of an eyesore.
yeah.
And the use is not, it just hasn't been it's been in marginal use over the years. Basically accommodated by the restaurant for a little while, right? No,
No, there's Wild, there was the smoke shop.
Yeah.
The vape shop
Yeah.
at one point.
Right.
Yeah, I don't remember.
I
what
just think it
the
upgrades the
names.
neighborhood
Several
just
Yeah.
stores.
for the investment,
So
and
that's good.
it, you know, these. I'm sure the buyers, you know, crunch the numbers, and this is one way it works.
Okay, so I make a motion that we, approve the variance, to the number of, to the parking table by, allowing 2 valid spaces instead of 4, for the reasons that I just stated. And that's my motion.
I'll second. If you want a second?
I'm sure I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, unanimous.
Great, thank you. I just want to thank you guys, you know, like you're just so thoughtful and methodical in your approach and your deliberation and, I appreciate what you're doing.
You're welcome.
What would you say if we went against you?
That's the same exact thing. As you were tabulating the scores there, you know, it's like you had to, you know, it's a little bit of a white knuckle there,
Yeah.
but you know, you had to deliberate and you did.
Well, it's a, you know, it's a big, it's just a big issue,
Totally understand.
big issue.
That's great.
No, and someone's gotta take it on and it's, you know, there's, you know.
But the red boxes made it clear.
That was really helpful.
Thank you, yeah. Good, well, thank you all.
All right.
And I'll see you on the 14th.
Yeah, see you next month.
No, we haven't adjourned.
Yeah, so,
Oh,
I was level setting that we hadn't adjourned.
okay. Yeah, there was nothing else, on the agenda. I did submit the revised application form to the trustees.
Oh,
We're
good.
going to talk about it next week at their meeting next week. Other than that, I have no other comments or business. Anyone else? Anything to say or
mm,
report? No.
Thank you for,
oh, that was
all the work you put together and these, mailings done, discussing what the issues are. Thank you.
The motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
great.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Good.
Good night.